quickly want to just recap this week. The governor gave his State of the State address. He released his budget for the upcoming session. Everyone, I think, seems to agree it's going to be difficult. What was your takeaway from the governor's proposed budget and how things are going to play out up in Carson City?
Well, I think he was able to, put together, a better budget than we anticipated based on the circumstances that we're in. We were expecting, the revenues to be really bad, and they're not good, but they're better than what we originally thought. So that's good. And he looked at, a lot of things that we really need to prioritize. So, I think when it comes to, economic development, those kind of things, I think he did a really good job with what he was given.
Considering where things were after the special session over the summer and the cuts back then, obviously the governor wants to reinstitute a good chunk of that. Are you concerned that the basis of some of the funding is too optimistic? There's a lot of leaning on federal assistance. Is there too much optimism coming from the governor's office?
I don't think so. I think that there is some optimism right now. There's a change in the administration, and there's a desire to help. Even before with the previous administration, they helped. So this is even more help that they're offering. So I think, for us to really get through this, we're really going to need some help. And I think that's where that optimism is coming from. Without that, there would have to be some other massive cuts.
Let's talk education. The funding formula obviously has been a major issue that you have been touting for a long time. What are the chances that gets fully implemented during this session?
So, we're going to look at that. I'm trying to understand what the governor's proposing in his proposal. It's very important for us to implement this new funding formula. It's transparent, makes it easy for everybody to understand where the money's going, and it focuses education funding on education. So I think we all have that goal to make sure that happens, and that's what we're working towards.
But in the hierarchy of priorities specific to education, given the circumstances with the pandemic, just getting kids back in class, where does finishing the funding formula adjustments, where does that fit on your priority scale?
Well, I think that's the number one thing we need to do. Keep in mind, the funding formula is not about how much money we're putting into education. It's how we allocate it. And having a transparent funding formula that allows us to, even if we're just looking at it and we want to make adjustments, it's very easy under the new formula to make those adjustments. So for me, it's very important that gets implemented, because over 10 years, just with doing nothing else, over 10 years, it's going to add over $1 billion to our education funding, and because of the focus on education and having its own education rainy day fund, and just keeping the money with education. So for me, that's my number one priority, is to make sure that we get that implemented.
What kind of, acknowledging that the Democrats control things, just the houses up in Carson City, but how much of a fight over money is there going to be this legislative session compared with all other ones? It's always a bit of a dogfight up there. There's not endless supplies of funding to go around. But when everyone gets together and you start to talk, how much of a scramble is it going to be?
Well, I think everybody is anticipating that we're not going to have any extra money. We've got what we have, and I think people are more understanding as we get up there. I don't think there's a lot of proposals. I don't think people have a lot of proposals that are going to require a lot of extra money. And so I think people are going to be willing to sit down and work together, to make sure that whatever proposals come forth, that we can work together on that. And I think that's true in both houses. I think it's true across the aisle. I think we all want to work together and know that there's a limitation on what we can do.
Education aside, what are some other measures, some other issues that you hope to tackle or put your support behind when the session starts?
Well, definitely one of the things that, in addition to all the issues that, education and the pandemic has pointed out in education and inequities. I think economic development needs to be another huge issue that we need to tackle. We need to find ways to expand. The way that we currently bring in revenues for the state is very limited. There's only certain ways you can do that. So the only way you're really going to increase revenues is to change our economy in a way that we're bringing in additional revenues from, we're so dependent on tourism, gaming. We've got to find other ways to bring other industries so that, when we have a pandemic like we do right now, tourism is the first thing to go, and it's usually the last thing to come back. And so we want to make sure that we have other industries here to help us be able to get through these tough times.
But, the governor talked a lot about that, trying to, increase the innovation in the economy. But that's a long-term project. That's not, all of a sudden tomorrow Switch is joined by a million other similar tech companies here. It seems, though, that Nevada needs some short-term fixes. Is there anything short-term that the legislature can do besides wait for federal funding?
As far as increasing right now, any short-term things would have to be things like making sure that we're that the internet, for example, things that are purchased on the internet, that we're getting those sales tax revenues. That's something that could be more immediate. Any adjustments that we would want to make to any of the existing taxes could bring more that way. But this is a tough time to look at those issues and see what we can do more in the immediate. So things like, trying to figure out ways that we can save and maybe do things more efficiently. And we've been doing that for years. And so we're pretty slim when it comes to all of that. At the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we're working on the long-term things, because it's never going to come to pass if we don't start that process now. And at the same time, we're going to be looking through the budget, seeing everything that we can do on both the expenses and the revenue side to see what can happen as far as bringing in any additional revenues.
You were kind of hinting at, with regards to bringing in revenue, increasing taxes, as we were talking about, for example, resorts, gaming, etc. If there are fewer people visiting and you're trying to encourage people to visit, but then you're also on the back end raising the taxes on those visitors, those kind of seem to make they'd be in opposition, no?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not a great time to be raising revenue because, like I said, we're so dependent on the tourism, and so I don't know where we go in that respect as far as, is there places that we can look? Sometimes, though, there are, as you look at the legislation and you look at, there might be places where we're currently not receiving taxes that we really should. I'm not sure. I think I that's something that we're looking at, but I don't have any real specifics. I mean, I know I've heard of some things that are going on, but I don't have any information on it at this point to know if that's something. But I think that the internet, looking at the internet tax thing is an important issue that we've been doing, and some of the big companies have already been paying those taxes. So I don't know that we're going to find, there's no magic bullet. You're not going to find some brand new tax that nobody has ever heard of and implement something like that. I just don't see us implementing any new. And the other thing, there really is no way to do anything short term as far as increases in revenues that would be brand new, because anything brand new that you implement, you wouldn't actually, by the time you set it up and get going, you're already mostly done with the next 2 years. So it really doesn't help with this budget.
So it all comes down to the federal assistance.
Right. The only thing immediate could be any federal assistance that we can get. And I think the other thing that would be really helpful, both in education and in all aspects, because the healthcare and all of that, is having flexibility. If we're allowed to have flexibility where our hands aren't tied, that money has to be spent a specific way, and if we don't spend it, then we can't use it. So if we could be flexible and be able to spend it in the areas that we need to know, that's another way to actually get more with actually not really getting more revenue, but giving us the ability to actually spend it in the areas that we need to and be more efficient in that respect.
I'm out of questions. Anything else?
I think that on the education front, I think the other issues that we're really going to look at and tackle is how do we move forward into the future with the things that we've learned. One of my big things that I'm working on with the Department of Ed is competency-based education, where we have the ability for kids to actually move at their own pace, which could be helpful. That's one tool that we implemented as a trial over the last few years, but now we want to look to see if there's a way to implement it at a larger scale, so that in some aspects we could educate kids better, so in some cases faster. Some might need more time, but those kinds of things, and any other things that have come up during the pandemic that allow us to look at where the inequities are and be able to put some things in place that will help us fix those inequities, and educate all of our kids to the best that we can. And I think that's important, that we work on this session.
All right. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
All righty.
Good luck. Thanks again for taking the time this morning. Appreciate it a lot.